Hey everyone, and welcome to Behind the Mask. I'm one of your co-hosts, EJ, and joining me today are my friends Lori
Hello.
and T.
Hello.
This is episode 9. We're calling Masks to Thrive By. Remember how we said that masks aren't always a bad thing? This is one of those times. Sometimes our masks help us cope with grief and loss, and we're going to talk about that today. Just a friendly reminder that anything discussed today is not to be used as a diagnosis or a replacement for conversations with your own doctors, therapists, psychologists, or medical professionals. And we are going to go ahead and use our medical professional and let her kind of chime in first. So take it away, Tina.
Awesome. So the first thing we want to talk about today is coping skills. How do we cope with loss and grief and any sort of stressors, anything that might be impacting our daily life? Some examples of coping skills are things like deep breathing, writing, journaling, physical activity, how we talk. Also, arts, anything artsy, craftsy, anything creative, meditation, listening to music are just some examples. Some of the things that I work with clients on is also things like grounding skills, things like using like five, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. How many? 5 things you see, 4 things you hear. How many blue things do you see? Anything that'll ground you in the moment. Those are really great skills, tools. So, um, what are some coping skills that you guys have used?
You want to go first, DJ?
uh, honestly, the ones you listed, I pretty much do most of them. The deep breathing, the writing, the journaling, physical activity, self-talk. I do talk to myself. I'm not crazy, I promise. If I am in the mood, I'll also get keeping my hands busy with like an arts and crafts, like creative thing. I do sometimes sit and kind of meditate or at least just do the deep breathing exercises. I know. Sometimes music can help me. Sometimes music is the cause of my, some anxiety. So I sometimes steer clear of music, but sometimes it works for me. Oftentimes I'm also a Christian, so I do tend to read certain scriptures that have always helped me. Um, if I'm really in a tough spot, sometimes I might reach out to somebody. It's, we're not meant to like live life alone, so, it's good to help, and sometimes our to me, coping skills is like how we deal, but it's also like, how the other people around us can see us dealing with it because it'll help other people as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about when you started talking about the counting, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This comes to mind. So, if anybody's out there has watched Family Matters, the one with Urkel, the sitcom from the 90s, and one of the episodes, the dad, I can't remember his name, but he went to a counselor or a therapist or something, and they gave him this like treatment that was like he was supposed to say 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3. What in the heck is bothering me every time he got stressed out?
Sorry.
And so like through the whole episode, he was like saying that on repeat, and like every time you get upset or like frustrated, because like Urkel would come over and he'd get really frustrated with Urkel because he drove him crazy. And so he'd always just like keep repeating that. It was so funny. It turns out the person he went to was like a quack, so he wasn't a real doctor or anything. But it was to this day, and that's like 20 some odd years ago that's stuck in my head.
Oh, that's funny.
And so I think about that like whenever you talk about the numbering or the counting, and for me like I guess it's a coping mechanism. I count, like when I'm my OCD tendencies, like I have to do things 3 times. Like sometimes it's a counting thing, like it's a coping thing. Or I'll only eat even amounts of things, so I can't eat 3 M&Ms. I have to eat 4 or 2. um, and I can't just hit the alarm on my car once. I have to do it at least twice. I have to do it in even amounts. So it's kind of some kooky things I do, but yeah, those tend to help me cope through
Well, what you're
stressors.
our traits or mechanisms. That's also a good term, but yeah, we affiliate them with OCD, but OCD comes out of a need to give some control to the environment. That's a piece of it, a small piece of it, but that is a part of it. And that's what you're describing. And that's essentially what coping skills are meant to do, is to give you some sort of control, or at least bring you back to the present if needed.
Right, because oftentimes grief and loss sometimes comes out of nowhere, and you lose that control in that moment, or you can't control that situation.
Right. So when it becomes OCD is if you have this irrational belief around those behaviors. So like if I eat 3 M&Ms, something bad and tragic is going to happen. The only way to keep everyone around me safe is to eat 2 or 4 M&Ms, but not 3. So there's a belief system that goes with that. Yeah. If you're heading into things like OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, or some of those other disorders in that area.
Okay.
Just a little bit of tidbit.
Yeah. And I can't remember what my psychologist said. He didn't think I had OCD. I think he said I had like obsessive compulsive tendencies.
Right. So, and what he's saying there is you don't meet the requirements of a disorder. You just have some traits or some behaviors that kind of fall in line with that. Also, it gets confused with a disorder called obsessive compulsive personality disorder, but that's more static, and the symptoms are more broad, without having the definition in front of me. But so in other words, it's hard to change. It's really part of the personality, rather than just about behaviors. So, but with OCD, it's more about the intrusive thoughts, and intrusive and often irrational thoughts, along with compulsive behaviors. The behaviors you're describing are slightly compulsive, but there's no real ritual around them.
Right. Yeah, I don't have to have everything on my desk a certain, angle or anything like that.
Right.
And, just one kind of last thing, writing. Sometimes when I'm coping, like I get the best writing out of myself and the most writing when I'm going through something.
Yep.
Yeah, I've written some really good stuff in times when I've been coping with a loss or just been emotional from some sort of stressor.
You're accessing your emotional centers of your brain when you're grieving and in distress. All the emotional centers of your brain are there and online at that point, and you're writing during that time. So
yeah,
makes sense.
Yeah.
How about you, Lori?
Yes, I definitely tend to engage in the journaling and writing and praying, and I've been really probably the last few years. What's interesting, Tina and I have a friend in common who she went to school with, and he would often help out with my first chronic illness group that I ever had. And one of the things that he had brought up was this whole technique of mindfulness. And I am not going to lie. Like, I was like, this sounds so hokey. I just really was like, I don't know. I don't know. But I ended up really liking it. And I went through books about eating and mindfulness, and I really started to engage in mindfulness, and I found it extremely helpful. So, I guess even if it sounds hokey, I'll encourage our listeners and my friends to just try it anyway. You just never know what's going to stick and what's going to work for you. And I
In other words, it's okay to do the hokey pokey.
Yes, yes, it's totally okay to do that hokey pokey if that works for you. Um, I I have never had as much success with the breathing, um, unless I were in like a panic attack or something, you know. Um, I don't know. That didn't seem to really, I don't know. In some high anxiety times, I guess the breathing works, but for me outside of that, it's not really something that I engage in that often. Um, but yeah, journaling is huge for me, writing, and reaching out. You know, I'm typically I I have those safe people, those people that I know who I can call and when I can call, and I engage that way. So yeah.
So, a couple of things kind of come to mind. First of all, a little self-disclosure, a little disclaimer. I don't know what you want to call it, but and most people kind of find this a little bit ironic, but because I'm a therapist, but I hate meditation. I hate mindfulness.
Okay.
I hate when I first started doing this thing called therapy for people, talking about breathing. I was rolling my eyes in the back of my, behind when they weren't looking. Oftentimes at the beginning, when I first started, I would give people lists of resources that they could use. Like, okay, here's a good website to walk you through mindfulness. Here's a good website to walk you through meditation, free, no cost to access, and things like that, because I didn't really buy into it. Now, I still have a hard time with it. I can't do meditation. I know why I can't do meditation, and I'm okay with that. I have other coping skills I can use instead.
Okay.
Mindfulness is a little traumatizing for me because that's what my thesis was on, and I hated mindfulness to begin with. And then to have to write my thesis on it, oh my gosh. Yeah.
I can understand that.
But here's some things that I've learned about mindfulness. Mindfulness, for those of you who don't know, is an Eastern, been around for a very long time, but an Eastern approach to uh, uh, coping. It's a kind of like a meditation, but not. It's definitely related. So the idea is picture yourself driving home from work. And just get home from work. How often could you look back and count how many green lights and how many red lights you went through on your way home to work? Most of us, when we go to try to do that, we're like, holy crap, I don't even remember the drive, let alone the lights. And I only work 2 minutes from home. So it's like, man, I checked out quick. We all do that. So the idea of mindfulness is to pay attention in the present without judgment.
Right.
The without judgment is often the hardest part for people because we judge everything.
Yes, we do.
Let's say we're doing a mindfulness practice and we are just focusing on our breathing. So, right there, I've already checked out mindfulness and breathing. So all of a sudden, so you're trying to focus on your breathing, but then you notice the clock ticking. Our automatic response is, I noticed the clock ticking and now I messed that all up and blah, 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 blah. With mindfulness, the idea is like, I noticed the clock ticking. Now I'm going to go back to my breathing. No judgment, just acknowledging that you noticed it. So that's mindfulness from a person who really isn't into mindfulness. Where I use it is oftentimes people who are struggling with areas they're feeling out of control in. And one of those is eating. And so I remember when I was helping someone with who had binge eating disorder. So they, bulimia. So they would binge and then purge.
Mm-hmm.
And she was talking about the out of control nature of the binging, the mindlessness of it.
Yeah.
So I went and I was like, okay, what's the best approach? I was a brand new therapist. I was still doing my internship. This was in my internship. Like, okay, so what's the best approach to this? And I came across mindfulness. And so I read it, and it had a really great exercise for people who were struggling with binge eating. And that's not to stop the binge eating, but pay attention while you're binge eating. So let's say you've got that bag of chips in front of you. Normally, I know for me, if I'm sitting in front of the TV, it's gone and I don't even know it because I just mindlessly ate through it. But what if I took it chip by chip and I did the mindfulness eating practice? That's where you'll look at the chip in your hand. You smell the chip in your hand. You notice how your body reacts. You notice how your mouth reacts. And this isn't, it sounds like it's like a 10-minute long process. It's not really. And then you place it in your mouth and you just notice what happens in your mouth and you just pay attention to each bite, the flavor, all of it. And then you just do that with each and every bite. You find that you're satisfied way faster into that bag than if you're sitting in front of the TV eating that bag.
Yes.
So that's just a bit of mindfulness. That's a little bit of blurb that I didn't intend to talk about today. So that was awesome.
I like it. It's helpful.
The other thing I want to talk about is breathing. So that is definitely something I always like, yeah, whatever. Breathe in, breathe out. Got it. Until I looked at the science behind breathing. So there's a couple of things I want the listeners to be aware of. First of all, the first thing our brain does when it's in distress is to go to fast, shallow breathing because it needs to get that oxygen and that blood out to our massive muscles as fast as possible.
Okay.
So that's what we do when we're under stress. That's what our brains and our bodies are trained to do. So as long as we're breathing like that, it's supporting that fact that we're in danger or something, something's really bad. But if we slow it down, that's providing that oxygen and that blood to that front part of the brain that needs to come online to make decisions, to look around and go, oh, that's not a tiger in the trees, that's a bunny rabbit, right?
Right.
So there's that. And then there's another thing that I learned recently. There's this, I'm going to see if I can say it right, this vagus nerve that runs from the base of our brain down into our abdomen, around our digestive organs.
Okay.
And its job is to send stress in our digestive system to send a signal to the brain to relax. Okay? So when we take what we call diaphragmatic breathing, so that's breathing right down into that diaphragm and pushing that diaphragm down, it presses on that vagus nerve, which in that vagus nerve is going, whoa, relax, relax. And so it's sending that message to the brain to relax.
Okay.
So slow, deep breathing, especially diaphragmatic breathing. I'm really impressed with myself for being able to say that. There's scientific background to why that works.
Interesting. Yeah.
And then when your husband brings you a cup of coffee, that's also very relaxing.
Yes. Yes, I bet it is.
He just brought me a cup of coffee if you didn't guess.
That's it. I got it. That's awesome. I love it. I love it.
So, were you going to say something, Laurie? I think I heard you.
No, I just feel like I'm learning a lot. It's great. I'm really like, wow, I didn't know all that stuff. So I think that's why I really enjoyed doing this with you ladies, because every time I think I'm prepared for something, I'll go to do some research or I'm listening to something you're saying, T, and I'm like, wow, I did not know that. So I really enjoy what we're doing, and I'm definitely enjoying learning. So
yeah, I totally enjoy what we're doing, and I think this is important, and I think it's like mindfulness specifically. I remember when you first started that, Lori. I was like, yeah, go right ahead. And I still to this day I recently had a panel with a dietary nutritionist for a program that my doctor wants me to get into. She's talking about taking buying these special fork, knife, and spoon on Amazon for like $20, and they're like specifically the size of like what you're supposed to take as a bite, and it's like the size of a pea. And I'm like, yeah, okay, you can keep those. I'll eat with chopsticks if I have to, but I ain't doing that. That's a joke. But I don't struggle with food the same way either. So for people who maybe struggle with food, you know, mindfulness, especially with the eating, you know, is something they have to be more aware of and more trained in.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, for me, like Tina, for you, I get it. You know, so I get that, and you know, and I know Lori went through that program, and she really enjoyed it after she started. You know, kind of learning what it was.
Yeah.
So in my experience, a lot of people have trouble with mindfulness and meditation because it requires being able to sit in your own head.
Yes.
And for some folks, there's also a sort of safety sensitivity to it. So being aware of what we can and cannot accept is extremely important. I think we'll probably get to this even more a little bit later in this particular show, but knowing what coping skills work for you. It's not a cookie cutter thing.
Right.
Everybody's list is going to look different. So even though we all described being, you know, having that arts, crafts, creative bit, you know, Laura usually denies that part of it, but but it's going to look different for every person, even that aspect. So some people, their creativity might be writing a story. Their creativity might be drawing. Their creativity might be modeling clay. You know, painting a car, or you know, creativity comes in all forms.
Yes.
So it looks different for everyone. And like I said, I think we'll come back to that in a little bit.
Yeah. Sounds good.
So are we ready to move on?
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay. So the next part we're going to talk about is very much related to coping skills, and it's hard to kind of suss it out, like what's the differences, but it's resources and how to access your resources. And you ladies alluded to that when you were talking about your coping skills, is reaching out to people. But it's also knowing when and how to access them, and just having a nice, well-rounded list of resources. Let's see. So when I'm working with clients, part of what I do with them is what I call a crisis card. I also call it coping card, whatever works for that client. We often identify what their crisis points look like, and so they know when to use things and what to use at what points. And we create a whole list because there needs to be a bit of variety in it. Because I know for me, one of my coping skills, my coping skills is to take a bath. I like soaking in the tub and watching videos or listening to music. And but if I'm stressing out in the middle of the store, I really can't go do that.
Right. You mean I can't just find a soaker and jump into it?
I mean, if we're at Home Depot, maybe Lowe's.
I was gonna say, if we're, you know, hardware store, IKEA, maybe.
Oh man.
You know, if jumping on a trampoline works for you in the middle of Walmart, awesome. But
Hey, you're good to go.
you know, so having a list, having a variety of resources and coping skills is important. So, and resources also, you know, it's great to be able to do things like painting, to be able to do things like writing and listening to music. But if you don't have those things available to you, you know, like the supplies and whatnot too, those are resources. Also under the list of resources, I include not just friends and family, but who else in the community is a resource for you. It might be your counselor, it might be your doctor, it might be a teacher.
Right.
those are all resources.
Pastors, parents,
Absolutely.
there's, you know, lots of, yeah.
Support groups.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It's so amazing, really. So I'm curious, why do we, is it because we don't make these lists and we don't have these resources handy that when we go through a crisis, we just kind of like,
Yeah.
it's like everything flies right out of our head, or,
Yep.
you know?
Yes. Absolutely. So that's one of the reasons I do what's called a crisis card, is because when we're in it, we don't think. That front
Right.
part of our brain that plans and can think of, oh yeah, so and so is really good at this thing, and I can ask them for help with this. We can't think of those things. We can barely remember our middle name when we're
There are
at the height of it.
sometimes, yes.
Yeah.
So yes, so that's part of the reason I created crisis cards, because on one side it describes what, the first signs that a person's going into distress, and on the other side is a list, including phone numbers.
That's a really good idea. Why didn't I think of that? Yeah.
Because the last thing I'm going to be able to do, like if I'm in distress and I don't have access to, most of us have cell phones, but what if we didn't have our cell phone, right?
Oh, yeah.
And we had to dial someone, trying to remember that person's number, if we even know it. So I always make sure to write out phone numbers, even numbers to, write out the phone numbers to their counselor, or, well, that's usually me. But my number two goes on there. The emergency contact numbers and whatnot goes on that card. But we go into that much detail, as much as the client's able to, on what their resources and coping skills are. So they can just look at this card and say, I can do that right now.
Right.
That's really awesome.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. As you were, mentioned that, I was like, wow, because you're right. Because like, there's been times when I have gotten into a moment where like I'm like numb. I can't think. I can't function. And then like people I'm like, how do I get out of this? And so if I had just that one card or that one person I knew I could call to like get me through it, which I do have that. But that's a really cool idea.
A great
And
idea.
I usually set it up on a 3x5 card,
Yeah.
so that it can fit in a wallet.
Right. Back pocket.
Or even a 5x6 card works well too, because you can still fold it, and it's sturdy enough to hold up to the folding.
Okay. That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to implement that. Wow. Yeah. Like I said, I keep learning new things. It's fantabulous.
One of the things I think is important too is really important is knowing, and I think we'll come back to this too, but who to call for what. So
Right.
I may not be an extrovert, but I do have a lot of people on my list. And so I know that, if I have a problem that's spiritual in nature, Lori would be someone I would call, because I respect her experience in that and her knowledge of that. And there might be some other people on that list as well. I'm just using that as an example.
Right.
But if I need, something as simple as I'm down and I'm out and I know my energy is low, I'm going to look for someone who has a higher energy. Again, Lori's usually on that list.
Yes.
She is.
Again, it's not a one size fits all thing. It's not a cookie cutter thing.
Right.
I think I'm usually on the list for people when they need, just to bounce ideas off of.
Right.
I see myself as an idea person. So
yes.
that's,
You're definitely on my list for that.
but someone may not call me if they need some energy.
Right.
I'm not on that list. I'm not on the list of, I want to go have a blast and just, let out all this energy. I'm probably not on that list. I'm just
You're
Right.
so
want-
funny.
because I enjoy it, but I need someone else to help draw that out of me. So I'm aware of that.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Okay. I like that. That's good. I like how you do that. It's interesting because back when I was what I do with chronic illness groups, is I tell them you've got to have a list of resources. You have to have, and you have to know that
Mhm.
you're going to have some friends. One of the things that I have some friends who are absolutely fantastic at going to the hospital with me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have some friends that are not so good at the hospital thing.
They threaten to throw things at you.
Well, there are those. That's actually kind of fun for me. But what I was thinking, I had this one friend, and she literally drank like 4 shots of espresso. She was so nervous. She was so nervous about going to the hospital. She drank like 4 shots of espresso. She was bouncing off the walls. I think she technically drove the nursing staff, and the people they just didn't know what to do with her. She was just all over the place, and part of what it was is she was so nervous. She wanted to be there, right? And she was like, well, this isn't my thing, but I'm gonna go, so I think, I always tell people, identify those people that are good with just being quiet and sitting, and they don't
Exactly.
need answers right away. And, because that's the kind of person that you need when you go to the hospital, because you're not going to get answers right away, and nothing is going to go really smoothly, because that's just not the nature of a hospital. And so you need somebody that also, one of my sons, really kind of panics when he goes. It is just,
And
Guess
we
what
know which
that
one
one is.
is.
he will curl up into a ball and just be like, okay, wake me when it's over. He just, yeah. And so, I don't tend to have him come to the hospital with me when it's time for that. So, and again, not because he doesn't love me or doesn't care or anything like that. It's just simply because for him it's a difficult thing. So yeah, I like what you had to say about that, because I feel like it's really right on, and for so many areas in our lives, and we do have to identify our own strengths and weaknesses and other strengths and weaknesses.
And it's also really important to be able to set boundaries around, to be able to say, I'm going to take this resource off my list. And it's not just a person, but it could be a coping skill. It could be a coping skill that's turned into not such a good skill, right? It can turn into
Right.
something. It could be. So it's really important to be able to be aware that this list is not static. You can add to it and take from it as needed.
Oh, I'm
And
so glad you said that.
and a great example of that, my husband actually gave me permission to talk about this a little bit, but so as I stated previously, he has cancer, and so he has a cancer doctor. And as part of cancer, he has had to be on certain medications that are addictive. And he has decided he didn't want to be on such high doses. He wanted to start cutting back with the consideration of quitting them.
Mm-hmm.
And his most recent visit to his cancer doctor, they had he told his cancer doctor, look, I want to cut these ones down in half. And the cancer doctor got really upset with him and started telling him, well, you're just a drug addict. You need to go to AA and all these things. And my husband's like, wait, I wanted to cut in half. I want to cut down. I'm coming to you with this. Why are you doing this? Why are you being like this? And it was so offensive that he walked out of there. He's like, okay, that's it. I'm quitting these on my own. And I'm not going to do my treatments anymore. And so now his treatments are causing side effects. That's also part of what's informing him to make that decision. But but a large part of this was this doctor. Oops. And so he decided he had two different ones, and he decided he'd come down off the one first, which he did, and he did fine. And then he was coming off the last ones, and he didn't have enough to get through to wean down far enough. But he had ripped out his prescriptions that the doctor did write for him. Uh, you know, when he made this decision, he ripped them up so he wouldn't be tempted to go fill them. But he didn't have enough. So this weekend he ended up going cold turkey off the last one, and ended up in a medical emergency. We were at the emergency room twice Sunday morning because it was so bad. He's still dealing with the after effects of having done that. So he has made the decision that his cancer doctor is no longer a resource for him.
That's probably wise.
Yeah. However, we have two emergency room doctors on our staff in this little rural community, so that's saying a lot. And his primary care doctor, who are completely on his team and are working with him to wean off, trickle down at his pace that his body needs with monitoring. So he's had resources come alongside and say, okay, we'll help.
Yeah.
We'll help.
Oh, good.
So yeah, so they're working to work him back up just a little bit so that he can stabilize, and then they're going to trickle him down. So that's why it's really important to be able to say, okay, this is no longer a resource for me. This is causing me more damage in some way than good.
Yeah.
So
I like that. No, that's a great example.
Well,
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, we all know our own bodies, you know, and there are times when, you know, doctors just don't catch on or may not know you well, but wow.
This is the second cancer doctor that has done this to him. The first time the cancer doctor decided to walk into the chemo ward, the chemo suite, that's what they're called, and yell at my husband about how big of a drug addict he was.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I'm
that's what we're wondering. Why are you a cancer doctor?
Right.
If you hate cancer patients, why are you a cancer doctor?
Right. Dude.
You're the one that got him up to these meds this high. Why are you now mad at him?
Right. It doesn't really make sense.
Right. Well, and and I honestly, like, you know, hearing that story, I kind of had it. I wasn't on any like strong medication, but I don't know if anybody knows what GERD is, but it's it causes heartburn, and there's a whole bunch of stuff. It's a digestive thing, and I don't have a gallbladder, so I've been on, you know, Prilosec or omeprazole for 8+ years since I lost my gallbladder. And end of last year, my doctor was like, well, let's get you off that because it's not great to be on for long periods of time and put you on something different. So cold turkey, I went off omeprazole and I went on to this new medication. And for like 3 weeks, I had nothing but heartburn. Like I was miserable. And I was like, can I go back to the omeprazole? So I finally went back to the omeprazole because she was like, yeah, just go for it. And then, you know, a few months later, I started working with a nutritionist who also shared her concern with me on omeprazole long term. And, you know, she's like, well, if you're on the lowest dose, which I am, she's like, you have to like alternate days for a while. And then you have to go to like every 2 days and every 3 days. And I've been doing that for the last 6 weeks. I've been slowly weaning myself off. And I'm out to 4 days. Every 4 days I'm taking one. And I haven't had heartburn since I started doing that.
Wow.
So just that huge change, you know. So yeah, I can totally understand going off cold turkey. Just the whole, you know, that right there set me into a tailspin. I was miserable for those 3 weeks when I was heartburn. I couldn't eat anything. I didn't want to eat anything.
Yep.
And then, you know, you have to have, you know, something to eat or it's going to be worse. And I couldn't sleep. I couldn't, you know, so just, yeah, going through with, and so my body was going through withdrawals from having just coming off the omeprazole. But since I've been doing this slowly, gradually, like every 2 to 3 weeks, going one more day apart, I'm almost off the omeprazole
Yep.
now.
That's great.
So next we're going to talk about resilience. And so this is sort of kind of wrapping up the coping skills and resources. The other factor is resilience. So resilience in my mind is the tools we already have in our toolbox. So it's in psychological terms, it's the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. Psychologists view this as not just bouncing back, but can also involve personal growth. Some strategies that foster resilience are building relationships. So, as we talked about, knowing who will support you when you need it. Join a group like support groups, civic groups, faith-based groups, etc.
Yeah.
Self-care and activities that promote body and mind well-being like yoga, meditation, and mindfulness. And I said that without gagging. Avoid self-medication like engaging in drugs and alcohol. Find purpose like helping others, being proactive, setting and achieving goals. And knowing what the takeaways from your experience are is another one. And of course, accessing counseling, therapy, and or other professional help are ways to build resilience in folks.
I'm really glad you mentioned the drug and alcohol because, I've recently dealing with the nutritionists and stuff. A lot of times people say, especially those who have issues with food, if they take away the food, which is their kind of coping mechanism, and they might turn to something else like drugs and alcohol.
Right.
So, and that's like, it's very common for people to cope by just numbing the pain by taking a drink or a shot of whiskey or something, and that's not really going to help. It's just going to the issue's still going to be there. You just haven't dealt with it.
Exactly. A lot of times what happens is folks don't even realize something's wrong. Like they don't realize like these might be symptoms of depression or anxiety or PTSD or and so all they know is that, hey, I went out and partied with some friends last week. I had a blast and it was fun and I feel better.
Right.
And then it becomes a thing. And same thing with drugs. So.
And if you guys, if you get to a point where you do have to go on like an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication, usually one of the first warnings it says is do not take with alcohol or do not drink alcohol while on this medication.
Right.
Just because it can interact with the medication and the alcohol, and it can be a nasty combination.
Yeah, because the alcohol and the drugs are impacting what's going on in the brain, which same thing with the medications for depression and anxiety and et cetera. The other thing too is that a lot of people don't realize that alcohol is a depressant. They're like, oh, but I partied it up and I was the life of the party. How can it be a depressant? If you kept drinking, it becomes a depressant. So eventually, at some point, it depresses you. Right. So
and we're not
it's
saying
just kind
you
of
can't have a drink or a glass of wine, but in moderation. Being mindful. There we go.
Yeah, being mindful, and and what's the reason you're doing it?
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. So, like, if you're going out and having fun with friends and just letting off some steam and whatnot, there might not be any major issues with that. But if you're doing it because it's the only way you can feel good, which is defined by the person doing it, then that's the problem. As far as alcohol, drugs is a little bit different because different drugs do different things to your brain, and sometimes the very first time you do them can be devastating. Certain ones. So. I'm not a drug and alcohol counselor, so I only know some about it, and mostly in regards to the brain, what the brain does.
Okay. It's interesting, we're being authentic here and learning about ourselves, and I didn't realize until, years later, and we often think of drugs simply in a very kind of simplistic form. But I was talking with a friend yesterday, and I was like, yeah, I don't think you understand. Food is my drug of choice. It's
Mhm.
it's my go-to. It's it's my that thing that I choose no matter what, you know. Um, and I didn't. It took me a long time to identify that because it's not a traditionally seen, you know. But for me, it was my addiction. It was my. It still is. Um, it is my go-to negative coping mechanism, if you will. And but I think we need to be open to the fact that it won't always look standard, if you will. It could look very unstandard, you know.
Yeah.
So just to be aware of that.
Like what might be someone's drug?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so one of the things that you're right, Lori, very right. Food can be an addiction. Most drugs, even alcohol, gambling, um, even sex addiction
Mm-hmm.
and food addiction, those are all accessing what we call the reward pathway. I don't remember how that works off the top of my head, like the specifics. So it goes along this and then this. Basically, the idea, the premise behind it is that it accesses the reward pathway. And this pathway releases all those feel good things like dopamine and adrenaline and endorphins, all these things that make us feel good. They're the chemicals that are released when we're happy. Uh, uh, Sometimes even oxytocin, which is our love hormone, can be released through some of these addictions.
Mhm.
So it and what feels good.
Right.
So when that reward pathway is opened up, we go back to it. And unfortunately, most things that create an addiction, whether it be drugs or the food, even gambling, you have to do more of it to light up that pathway each time because you build a resilience. So
Interesting.
yeah, that's a little bit of knowledge I have on addictions.
Yeah, no, that's good though. I just thought I thought it was important to identify that it just doesn't always look like some of the standards, you know. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
at least that's
So
what I learned.
when we talk about resilience, what do you guys think of?
So I often talk, one of the things that comes to mind when I think of resilience, um, I mean, there's definitely that ability to kind of bounce back from something that the right doesn't bounce back from. But for me, I've always identified resilience in myself as, and I call it a gift from God, but I have an ability to find a silver lining, to find a way to look at something in a positive light, even when it's really, really, really dark. And so I would say that's how I view resilience, is an ability to do that.
So when I'm working with clients, we call that reframing. How can we
Reframing, there
look
you
at
go.
this? What can you learn from this? How can you make this a positive thing? And sometimes you can't. Sometimes negative is
Right.
negative.
Oh, yes.
But how do you not own it at that point? How do you put it in perspective?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
how about you, EJ?
Yeah, I definitely think about bouncing back, but bouncing back in a way that can be repeated.
Yeah.
Because it's oftentimes if we do it once, the thing that works, if you find something that works for you, you should be able to repeat it the next time, and it should help you. Because oftentimes, when you're in different situations where you have to cope, different needs come up. So you might have 2 or 3 things that you can do. Because there's been times when I can't write and I'm going through something. Whereas normally that's my go-to. Yeah, so I just, definitely being able to repeat it and remembering that. So, and if you find something that works that you maybe haven't thought of or done before, and you liked it, or you felt comfortable, that card that Tina was talking about earlier. So you can remember to go back to that at some point.
I like that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of just what I could think to add right now.
So when I was kind of going, looking up some ideas to talk about for this episode, I Googled. Google is your friend. I Googled coping skills, and I was like, I'll have to try that one with clients. That's a new one. So, and Pinterest is another great place to look for ideas when you're thinking, oh, I just don't have anything to put on my list. Trust me, you do. Because something I haven't really touched on, and I don't want to go too much into it, but we have what's called protective factors and risk factors. So each person has protective factors that is going to help them be resilient, help them survive traumatic things, because studies have been done. Why do some people go through the same exact event and they have two different results? One person will have PTSD, one person's going to heal. Well, protective factors are things like, what is your socioeconomic status? Do you have the resources available to you if you need them? Do you have the community available to you if you need it? Do you have access to professional help? How about your IQ? How about your sense of humor? That's actually a huge risk, protective factor, not risk factor. But a sense of humor is super big in that ability to be resilient. Risk factors are things like lacking the resources, lacking the financial availability to access resources, living in an area where those resources aren't available, lower IQ, of course, dysfunctional family settings and things like that. Those are all risk factors. Previous trauma is a risk factor. The more traumas you experience, the more likely you are to be re-traumatized or to experience the symptoms of PTSD. So those are all things that are a part of being resilient. They're all things about how well we can access our coping skills and our resources. Protective factors and risk factors affect our resources the most.
Okay. Yeah.
So
and as we all talk about all the time, I think it's important to, because I often say this, I can't talk about my ability to get through things or to handle things without my faith.
Absolutely.
And I know not everybody has that, but even when I'm sharing with, kind of non-faithful groups and things, I have to say, first off, you all need to know that I have a faith that is just, I wouldn't be standing here. In my mind, I know that I would not be standing here if it weren't for my faith. Because it's such a huge factor in who I am and how I deal with things. So,
well, in the study, spirituality is listed under the protective factor. Having access to a spiritual aspect of things, and it's very much acknowledged, even in the stodgiest of the corners of psychology, that spirituality is an important factor all the way around. It's on all our forms. Does this person affiliate with any spiritual or religious groups? Because it's important.
It is. Plays a factor. All right.
Anything else you guys want to add to that section?
No, I think you did a great job.
Yeah. Great job.
Like, seriously.
So we're going to wrap this all up by talking about what, when, and how to use our tools. Yes. So the challenge in thriving in the face of adversity is often knowing what tool to use when and how to use it. And I would even add when to get rid of it. Sometimes there was a tool that worked for us that got us through, but it was not a healthy tool, and it's time to get rid of.
Okay.
It's super important to acknowledge that, because oftentimes, especially when you're going through some sort of trauma or complex trauma, you use tools that get you through, that help you survive, like eating.
Right.
So eating for some serves a purpose of protecting us from receiving unwanted attention.
Yes, it does.
That was a tool that worked at one point, but at some point it creates an unhealthy body that cannot support living life. So it's no
Right.
longer a tool. It's no longer a useful tool. So it worked at one point, but doesn't work anymore.
It's a good thought.
So, and that's again where that card comes in handy too, is having that list of coping skills and resources, so that you have a full toolbox. And recognizing when to use it. I gave an example earlier. You can't take a bath in the middle of the grocery store if you're freaking out.
Right.
But you can do a grounding skill. Like I can look for 5 things I see, 4 things I hear, 3 things I smell, 2 things I can touch. I'd probably do it the other way around in a grocery store. And then one thing you can taste, that's your other, it's the 5 senses if you didn't catch that. And I always put the taste last because nobody wants to go around licking things.
No, they don't. Can't
So.
imagine why.
But you can do them really in any order. There's no right, absolute. The whole point is bringing you back into the present. So that's a coping skill you can use in the grocery store. You can do the diaphragmatic breathing, because most people aren't even going to notice you're doing that. So,
Right.
well, I would be all dramatic about it just because.
You're so funny. Oh gosh, I love you.
So, what are your guys' experience in using your coping skills, your toolbox?
So, it's interesting. I had a good friend here this weekend, and I think I don't even realize how far I've come from when I first moved to the state, and this friend of mine, he was commenting, he's like, Lori, I remember when you couldn't even be in the same room as another guy, I remember when you couldn't even talk about these certain things, and I'm like, oh, that's right. That was a thing, huh? And so I would say that for me, counseling, reaching out to my friends and loved ones, not continuing to try to do this on my own, have all played a huge factor in this whole kind of desire and growth for being authentic and being real and all of these things. I wouldn't honestly, gosh, just probably just even 2 years back, I would never have done a podcast. I would never have engaged so publicly in anything remotely close to this. And so I know that this stuff is working. It's definitely helping me. And I am grateful for, but I was realizing the other day, because I'm trying to learn how to love myself, and I was like, yeah, Lori, but you didn't have to choose those things. You could have chosen other paths. Often when I stand in front of a room full of women and share my testimony or talk about my background, often what I get is, how are you still standing? You know,
Yeah.
and
That a lot.
and I'm like, oh, that's a thing. Um, you know, not exactly sure. And then I'm like, no, no, no. And I didn't when I first got that question, I didn't really know how to answer it. But now I actually know how to answer that. And I can say, well, I got a counselor, I tried some medications, I did this, I did this. I'm choosing new pathways here. I'm working on this, you know. And so I'm beginning to like really feel like and even when I have slip ups, like, you know, you ladies and I were talking about earlier tonight, even when I have a slip up or something happens, I'm not falling into some pit of despair and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get out of this. And oh
Right.
my gosh, I ruined my whole life. And, you know, so I think there's been some massive growth and change. And that's how I would say my experience with all of this is going, you know? So
Um, well, I think for me over the years, I have definitely gone through. Um, so let's see, it's been 13 or so years since I really hit like a mental rock bottom. I had a really rough go in about 2008 or so. Um, and up until then, I'm like, nope, whatever's wrong with me, I can take care of myself. I don't need help. I don't need medication. I'm not going on antidepressants. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that. Um, I was just being very stubborn. Um, but it finally got to a point where I realized something was wrong. I wasn't acting normal. It was affecting my life and those around me. And I had to get help. And I'm grateful for that. I learned a lot with my counselor, my psychologist, and between him and my regular doctor, she was able to get me on some antidepressants that really helped um, give me a little boost and like working through some of that. And I've really come a long way. There are times I slip. Like Lori, I'm a Christian, so I fall back. Like I always lean on God now. I do also get the conversations with all the things I've gone through with my parents and my past. People are like, "Well, how are you still standing? How did you get through that?" Um, and I used to just say, "Didn't really have a choice. I just sucked it up and." I think the phrase is put on my big girl pants and just kept going, or,
mm,
but, it, which is not ideal. But now I know it's because, I have the power of God behind me and I have God's grace and mercy and his help, um, to keep me going. And he's giving me the strength to get through things. Um, and I've learned through trial and error too. I've done things that weren't the greatest coping. I've started doing things and I'm like, okay, well that's probably not most ideal. So let's maybe not do that. And um, and I'm trying to lose some weight now, and um, I basically cut out processed sugars like in my house, and um, that I want to go back to it. But just honestly, like when I think about it, it's kind of like those, we all have those plateaus. Losing
mhm.
weight is a journey, and you're going to have a plateau and you're going to just stay at that same weight for a few days, and then you might lose a pound and then you might gain another. um, and it's when those ups and downs start happening more frequently and the coping needs to continue. um, it's that's definitely when you need to start working on some other skills and maybe get a counselor. I've actually all the stuff going on recently with health changes and other stuff that I should like seriously consider getting another counselor, because mine has since retired, so I wouldn't be able to go back to him. But you know, and it's not, it's okay to go to a counselor. I'll tell you right there.
Amen.
I'm glad you say that.
Yeah, it keeps hitting his job. Yeah, you know, because there's a lot of times where, and I'm sure it's how some people were raised, and I know, you know, some cultures, some nationalities, that's counseling and talking and sharing your stressors or your dirty laundry, so to say, with, you know, a stranger is like the last thing you should be doing. But having an outside party to your life to talk to, even if it's just to talk, like you don't even have to get advice from them. You just talk to them. They're not going to judge you. They might offer you some, you know, as to, you know, coping mechanisms or some ways to kind of get through that, which is what my counselor did. I often just went into his room and we would talk for an hour. So don't don't think that you can't go see somebody or to ask
Definitely
for
not.
help. And I think I just talked into a circle, so I'm gonna.
Well, and here's the thing about a little bit of advice as far as seeking counseling. It's not always going to be the perfect fit the first time.
Nope.
Right.
It's another one of those situations where you get a choice. You get to make the decision. Is this a good fit? Is this a resource for me? If it is not, then don't stay there. There are others. We come in all different shapes and sizes and all different backgrounds. So for me as a counselor, I tend to be very in the moment and sort of in a sort of way asking the client, how's that working out for you? In a very respectful and kind and understanding manner. That's just me being, you know, sarcastic, but not the nice part, the how's that working out for you part. Let me clarify. But anyway, you know, it's about education. So that's my approach. And I want to educate my clients. I want to help them understand why their brain is hijacking them in these very unfortunate moments, and help them learn those coping skills that's going to help them through that, and why those coping skills work. To me, that's an important part of what I do, is explaining the why it works. Because I don't buy in until I understand the why. I'm not going to expect my clients to buy in. So that, you know, that tends to be my approach. That works for some. For some people, they really want to talk all about their childhood, from the time they lost their first tooth, etc. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. This is just not really the kind of counselor I am most of the time. Every once in a while, I'll recognize there's a true need for a client in that, and I'll go there. But my feelings aren't hurt if a client decides, you know, this isn't really working for me. I'm going to go try. I'll often offer suggestions. Okay, well, here's some resources in the area for you. That's cool. That's totally awesome. You took control. Awesome. My job is done. You learned to take control.
Yes.
You know, so really it is about finding a good fit in your counselor, your therapist, and your doctors, all of it.
Yes. Yes.
So for me, what I have felt to build my resiliency, much like what you guys are talking about, is definitely my faith. My faith that in God, my faith that He's the one ultimately in control, and I couldn't have a better counselor than that. Also, my sense of humor. I heard that. You know,
Because your sense of humor is awesome.
Thank you. Finding something that will make me laugh, and the fact that I laugh easily. Sometimes that just points to my immaturity, but it really has served a purpose, because it accesses those same parts of the brain that drugs or alcohol might. And releases the endorphins and the dopamine, etc. So that's been a big piece for me. Um, I am very resistant to certain ideas sometimes, but then find out, oh, that was a good idea after all. So my husband's been hounding me to start going for going for walks, and this weekend I started doing that.
Mm.
And my goal is to go twice a day. I haven't managed the twice a day part yet, but I have managed once a day, and I physically feel better. But I noticed my mood was uplifted today, and I felt stronger. I was walking with my head high again. Um, I take my dogs,
Cool.
so which is very entertaining. For any who have met my puppy, would know that's very entertaining. He discovered birds today.
Oh
Um,
my.
Oh boy.
um, so that's been one of my new coping skills is that walk. I'm finding I'm really looking forward to it, which I did not expect.
That's awesome. I love hearing that. Yeah, I've been trying that. Oh my gosh, I forgot to send that one to you. Okay, so I'm I'm trying this dancing thing because I used to love to dance. And
Hmm.
so yes, that has been very, very helpful for me. So I'm I'm definitely enjoying that. Just kind of releasing myself and just having some fun and realizing that, I can just be free and do that. And I've really been enjoying it. So um
So, talking about dancing reminded as a coping skill
uh-huh.
reminded me of something. So, during that period of time where I was grooming dogs with one of my other best friends, she would notice I would get stressed out, and all of a sudden she would put down whatever grooming tool she was using, and she'd look over at me. She said, "Okay, 30-second dance party," and there'd be no music going, but we would all drop our stuff, and the dogs just on their tables in front of us, but we just sit there and dance in place and be all silly and dance,
Oh my
and,
gosh, I love it.
and it was a great release. And so that's our joke now. Anytime we're stressed out, it's 30-second dance party.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it. That's a great idea. Oh, 30-second dance party. I need one of those in my life. Yes, that's what I need. I'm going to do yeah, oh my gosh. I found on Facebook, I found one of those um uh um it was a theater reference, and it was, every time you get stuck, just yell plot twist. And just switch it up, and I'm like,
Yep, I've
dude,
heard
I
that
so
before.
need to do that. I
Yeah.
so need to engage that way. Just plot twist and go with it,
Mm-hmm.
I
me,
really, yes.
mine would be end scene.
And scene, yes, I like that. See,
Yeah.
there's all these funny little ones. I love it. I love it. We need to engage more in those.
Yep.
So, yes, definitely. Those need to be a definite part of our coping skills and coping mechanisms. So, Tina, I do want to say thank you for leading us through this and walking us through some really great steps and all the amazing information that you are always just sharing with EJ and myself and everybody listening. I really do. I can't believe how much I'm learning and growing and changing, and um, you two are very inspiring to me, and I'm so blessed to have you ladies on this journey with me. So thanks a lot.
I feel the same.
Exactly.
Oh,
Ditto.
we got all the feels.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's great. I appreciate Tina's knowledge and helps add, that depth that, Lori and I wouldn't have had. And, because, we don't have a per se, a mental health background. We've gone through it. We've experienced it, but we've never been on Tina's side of, being the one trained in all this.
Yes, yes.
Um,
I love it. I love it.
yeah, so what do you guys think? We're done?
I think we're ready.
Just a friendly reminder that anything discussed in this podcast is not to be used as a diagnosis or a replacement for conversations with your own doctors, therapists, psychologists, or medical professionals. This episode is available on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as Behind the Mask PC, and we'll soon be on YouTube. If you don't use social media, you can email us at BehindTheMaskPC@gmail.com. Feel free to review us on Anchor, leave feedback on the platform you listen to us on, or message us through our social media or email, because we'd love to hear what you think. If there's a topic you'd like to hear us talk about, feel free to message us and we'll see about making it happen. You can find EJ on Twitter and Instagram as EJ8302 and T at her YouTube channel, T's Life's Lessons. If you'd like to help keep these episodes coming, you can monetarily support us by visiting anchor.fm/BehindTheMaskPC/support. And on behalf of Lori T and myself, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.